before, we have around 250 plus participants. So let's use one more minute to register everybody or admit everybody to this webinar. Good morning, good morning. We start shortly. Still admitting people, a lot of people joining, so bear with us. All right. 30 more seconds and then let's start. Getting more and more here, but I think we then can slowly start. All right. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on untapping the potential of biowaste, an update on the opportunities ahead and the challenges remaining. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Before we go actually into the webinar and the presentations, you can see here on the screen a couple of housekeeping rules we would like to make you aware of and to follow. So first of all participants' microphones and videos are currently turned off. You can unmute and turn your camera on when we come to the questions and answer sessions and when we call your name. So if you don't want to speak up or turn on your camera, you can use also the questions and answers box at any time during the webinar. We will either respond directly to your question and give you the answer, or dedicate it in or give you an answer in the dedicated Q&A session. In case we have so many questions we cannot answer them in the webinar today, we'll make sure that we'll do a follow-up after the webinar and as we keep track of your questions. And then, of course, if you wish to contact the host, if there's any issue there, please use the chat function. My colleagues and me will be there for you to help you. Your message will not be seen if you use the chat function. All right, so this is the housekeeping rules. Maybe the next slide. So we can see the agenda of the webinar today. As mentioned, we will talk about untapping the potential of biowaste. My name is Marco Rupp from BIC, the Bio-Based Industries Consortium. I will give a short welcome and intro. Then we'll hear from William Neale, European Commission, followed by Enzo Favoino on the report as such. And then we have some practical insights from Ismael and Amir before we then finally conclude. So we should be ready and going by 11:30 here today. Right, maybe next slide. So on BIC, the Bio-Based Industries Consortium, today, together with Zero Waste Europe, we published the second edition of what we call the Bio-Waste Report, and which we will hear more about. As the webinar is open to the public today, allow me to make some introductory remarks about BIC, the Bio-Based Industries Consortium. I guess what I'm trying to say about BIC in short is, if you have an innovative bio-waste project, you want to scale it up, you need partners, or you look for public and private investment support, you are with BIC at the right place. Of course, as you can see here on the slide, we do more than bio-waste. Actually, our members come from along the whole bio-based value chain. And in addition, we have also what we call associate members on top of our industry members. So our associate members, meaning university, research associations, organizations, and trade associations. And that combination is unique in Brussels. So what unites our members is the ambition to bring bio-based innovation faster to the market. And if we talk about bio-waste and a possible bio-waste project you have, how would that fit into the 4 strategic pillars, how we call them, and which you see on the right side? First, BIC is the private partner in a private-public partnership with the European Commission, the so-called Circular Bio-Based Europe Joint Undertaking, or as you can see here, CBEJU. So as we hear later today, many bio-waste projects are funded under this partnership. Your project could be eligible as well. Second activity and pillar we have is the business pillar. So if you want to find the right project partner, we can help you through our networking activities. Third, on finance, if your bio activities have a regional link or you look for private funding, we can help you to mobilize investment. And on our society pillar, if your bio-waste activities or project need visibility and a voice, we can help you navigating in the Brussels environment. So if interested beyond that webinar, please contact us. But back to our webinar and why we are here today. As mentioned, we are really happy to publish today the 2nd edition of the BIC and Zero Waste Europe report on bio-waste. The bio-waste sector is already valorizing bio-waste using innovative methods to convert bio-waste into high-value products. And we hope that also through the report, we will be able to more efficiently capture bio-waste in the future, especially for biomanufacturing. So that was it from me for giving some introductions about BIC and the context of the webinar today. So maybe if we go to the next slide, I would be very happy to, I'm very happy to welcome William Neale. William is an advisor on circular economy at the European Commission and in Director General for Environment. So welcome, William. The floor is yours. Give us, please, an EU perspective why bio-waste matters. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Marco. That's a great introduction. As you can see from the agenda, I've been asked to talk about why does bio-waste matter. So I'll start off by saying a few things about that, and then I'll go on to explain a little bit what's happening already, what the state of play is, and how we still got quite a lot of work to do. And then I will use my crystal ball a little bit to explain what we might be looking at in the next 5 years. Now, as you know, today is a day of big consequential global political decisions, and not least of those is the hearing of Jessica Roswell in the European Parliament. She's the candidate commissioner, the commissioner designate for environment. The whole college, the whole proposed college will be going through that grilling by the European Parliament. And on the basis of that, we will know a bit more. At the moment, we're in that kind of Donald Rumsfeld situation where we have some known knowns. We have some announcements already made by President von der Leyen. We have some unknown knowns. And we have some unknown unknowns. And so my crystal ball gazing is subject to that proviso. So your report, I mean, because of that situation politically, your report is ideally timed. Congratulations on very good timing, as it will certainly feed into our reflections as we advise our new commissioner and college and move forward with some of the announcements that have been made. But first of all, why is bio-waste so important? I mean, it represents about a third of municipal waste. I've seen figures of 37%, 34%, and so on. It's also a valuable soil improver and fertilizer, which could substitute a large amount of the synthetic fertilizers that we use. And in the current global situation, of course, with prices rocketing for fertilizers, and with our dependence on third countries, particularly Russia, that is, of course, of strategic importance for us. Also, biogas is a great potential source of renewable energy, which we estimate could cover about 10% of our natural gas needs. And biowaste could therefore help us to achieve the objectives of many of our policies in those domains. So the Renewable Energies Directive, the Methane Strategy, the Energy Efficiency Directive, Repower, and so on. Obviously, also, it is of fundamental importance to achieving our climate targets. Food waste, which is about 60% of biowaste, accounts for at least 6% of EU emissions of CO2, which is about twice that of aviation. So we certainly need to look at it in that context. Now, where are we at the moment? We have legal obligations. We have member states that are supposed to comply. We're going a bit ahead with the slides there. You can go back because I haven't started on that. We already have legally binding targets for member states on municipal waste recycling and on landfill. And so, for example, by 2025, 55% in general of recycling of municipal waste. It will be impossible, when you consider that 1/3 of that municipal waste is bio-waste, to achieve those targets without addressing bio-waste properly. Same goes for landfill, 10% maximum by 2035. And of course, bio-waste in landfill is particularly bad in terms of methane emissions. So we have targets. We also, as you know, we have the obligation for separate collection of bio-waste since the beginning of this year. But actually, one of the main points I want to make is that the fact that you have obligations and targets doesn't mean it's going to happen. And we need more than legislation. You can see from this first slide here what I've just been saying, that about 50% of municipal biowaste generated is collected separately. So we still have a huge amount to do, but also there's a huge potential there. And when you consider the treatment subsequently of that biowaste, we're looking at it being particularly dominated by composting and anaerobic digestion at the moment. Now, if we move on to the next slide, we've been looking at what's been going on in member states generally in terms of waste management. We produced what we call our early warning report, which is saying how they're getting on their trajectory towards those targets. And bio-waste was identified as a key problem in most of those member states that are still not on that correct trajectory. The big difficulties are with separate collection systems, with the efficiency, coverage and convenience of those, and the lack of capacity of recovery facilities downstream. So whilst we have those problems, and you can see here that there's a lot still to be done, you can also see from those different performances that there is a huge potential there. I think that your report, the Zero Waste and Bio-Based Industries Consortium report, is saying that current capture of food waste is about 16% of potential. You can see that there is a huge potential still there. And when you consider examples like Sardinia, where we hear that it's moved from 3% to 75%, you can see that it can be done. And so it's really tantalizing, that there is that potential there. If we move to the next slide, you can see that we have tried to provide guidance on this. Of course, you won't be able to click on these links now, but I hope that the organisers can share the slides, or at least the links, so that you'll be able to access the work that we've been doing on bio-waste and bio-waste collection. There is no one-size-fits-all policy. It does depend very much on local conditions, but there are as we found out, and with Enzo and others who are speaking here today, we organised a workshop 2 years ago for member states particularly. We found that many of the things that do work in nearly all cases and are transferable. So we're talking about the efficient and convenient door-to-door collection rather than having roadside containers. We can reduce the amount of plastic contamination and so on through that. The use of biodegradable bags, awareness raising, fundamentally important, and matching supply and demand. So need to work together also with farmers communities and so on, and also to provide some quality standards so that you have that confidence in the final product that it isn't contaminated, it is meeting certain minimum standards. So on that note, talking about supply and demand, I'll look a little bit to the future. President von der Leyen, in her political guidelines, announced a Circular Economy Act, and until the new Commission is with its feet under the table, we won't know exactly what that is going to entail, and in any case, we have to do impact assessments and so on. But we know from some of the reports which have been commissioned by President von der Leyen, so the reports of Draghi and Letta, that the real bottleneck has been identified as markets that aren't working for circularity. In some cases, a lack of demand pull for secondary raw materials. In some cases, price problems, market incentives, or just lack of a level playing field between secondary and virgin materials. So we know that the Circular Economy Act, which we are foreseeing for the end of 2026, when we've done all this impact assessment work, will address these issues. It will try to use some of the legislative tools we have, such as the Waste Framework Directive, end of waste criteria, and so on, to enhance those markets, to make them work better. So we will look at both the demand and the supply side. And I think here I would appeal to you as we prepare the impact assessment, as we're looking for evidence. Of course, every material is different when we're looking at different kinds of raw materials. For some, the supply side is a problem. For some, the demand side is a problem. For some, both. So it's good to understand better the particular issues surrounding biowaste, where those bottlenecks are, so that we can make sure that we're addressing them in the correct ways as we move forward. Lastly, just to mention another thing in our looking glass, in our crystal ball, the Environment Directorate General has been, or the Commissioner for Environment, the future Commissioner for Environment, has been given within her remit the review of the bioeconomy strategy. Now, I always think of bioeconomy as being one of the wings of the butterfly. I'm sure most of you know the circular economy infographic, the famous one from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, of a butterfly, technical materials on one side and biological materials on the other. And I think of the bioeconomy as one wing of that butterfly, and one which we really need to address in circular ways. And I think that the Bio-Based Industries Consortium and the joint undertaking and our existing bioeconomy strategy has done that very well so far. But we certainly need to move forward with that. We need to consider how we can ensure that the use of biomaterials is done in sustainable ways for different kinds of uses, for different kinds of materials. Bio-waste is a particularly important part of that. So there we are. We've had 5 years of the European Green Deal. We've had lots of legislation. We're coming up with some more to make sure that those markets work. But I would emphasize that as we move into the next 5 years, the next European Commission, we will be looking particularly also at boosting investment in circular economy. We're looking at a circular investment compass to try and identify the gaps in investment and how we can address those. And also looking at implementation, because that legislation without effective implementation is not worth the paper it's written on. So I think your work is highly important in achieving both of those. I look forward to a very interesting debate and to reading your report in more detail. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, William, for providing that overview, and in particular, the crystal ball. As someone said, the bioeconomy is the green motor of the circular economy. So let's see how we can live up to that. If you can stay with us, of course, that would be great. But as you said, it will be a busy day, plus a hearing tonight. So no worries if you have to jump out. But yeah, thanks so much. I don't see any questions for you at the moment, but if any, allow us to maybe revert to you, either if you're still here to answer or then via email.
With pleasure.
So thank you, William. All right. Then we come to, I guess, why you're all here today. We want to hear on the second edition of the Big and Zero Waste Euro report on bio-waste. We will hear now from Enzo Favoino more about this. Enzo is a researcher and circular economy expert at the Scuola Agraria del Parco di Monza. I hope it was fairly understandable, Enzo, my Italian. Enzo, please enlighten us on the second edition and share your findings with us. Enzo, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marco. I feel humbled and honored to be given the possibility to share the findings of our survey once again. Can you see the slides?
Not yet.
You don't see my slides?
Not yet. I don't see them. Maybe someone can confirm
I
that.
see them.
I do.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry for you, Marco. Maybe we will run a private presentation afterwards.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. And I see this is attracting huge interest because we know bio-waste is pivotal in the European agenda, in the circular economy policy. And this is why basically we resolved upon initiative by BIC and Zero Waste Europe to go to the second edition of this report, because this is a second edition. We had the first run in 2020. The world was totally different. It was during the beginning of the pandemics. So we went past the pandemics. Then there was the war in Ukraine. We have got the brand new obligation to have a separate management of bio-waste as stipulated in Article 22 of the Waste Framework Directive. So it was just about time to investigate whether there was any change in the captures of bio-waste and whether we do have still some way to go in that direction. And as you will see, there's still so much to do in this respect. So basically, the report, just as the previous one, includes an overview of what are the European policy drivers for bio-waste management. Then we do the calculations and we provide the findings for EU 27 plus, because we still include, we are stubborn. We still include United Kingdom and Norway because both countries, they say they want to align with European policy. And so it's great to investigate what's going on in those countries as well. So we investigated the current capture levels for bio-waste in general. But since bio-waste is comprised of kitchen waste, which is the brand new stuff, the next big thing to be done to separate food waste, and garden and park waste, we wanted to investigate more in specific whether we have got already a good capture of food scraps. And we will see in a while why food scraps are particularly intriguing and important in this respect. Then we did the comparison to the potential, the theoretical and the operational potential of bio-waste and of food scraps in order to see how much is the so-called untapped potential, because there is a potential we still have to tap in. And then we provided an overview of a few best practices, both related to separate collection, what the local jurisdictional divisions of different countries are doing, big cities, regions, and something like that, and also new industrial initiatives as the ones that the members of BIC are carrying out in the sector of biorefineries, extracting valuable compounds, and so on and so forth. Just as the previous edition, the report is supplemented with a wealth of information coming from specific country fact sheets, which are based on the assessment by the European Commission on the implementation of environmental legislation, and on the early warning which was issued by the European Environmental Agency regarding the 2025 targets in waste management. Now, why a focus on bio-waste? First of all, the first one is an easy feedback because it's in the mission and vision of the two networks. It's pivotal for bioeconomy, which is the main focus of BIC, and it's pivotal for circular economy, which is the focus of Zero Waste Europe. But if we get in the shoes of the local decision makers, there are many more factors to consider why bio-waste is important. First of all, it is fundamental in order to meet the material recovery targets, preparation for use and recycling as it is defined in the Waste Framework Directive, 65% by 2035. And there is no way, we do know, but let me stress it once again, no way to get there without an effective strategy and practice in order to capture bio-waste and food scraps. It also is at the crossroads of various environmental policies, not just waste management, but also the common agricultural policy, farm to fork, and something like that, climate change. Our soils are the second largest pool of carbon in the planet after the oceans. And so while we strive to decrease the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, if we store more carbon in the soils through the use of organic fertilizers, and compost is one such fertilizer, we will have more carbon in the soils to produce fertility and resilience of our soils, and less carbon in the atmosphere to produce climate change. So it is important. This all is the reason why we do have the brand new obligation stipulated in the Waste Framework Directive, Article 22, effective January the 1st, 2024, this year, for separate management of bio-waste. But we will see that despite the obligation, still there is a long way to go. We will see that in a while. Now, the key role of organics from the operational standpoint, when it comes to practical implementation of separate collection programs, recycling programs locally, and in particular, the importance of food waste is twofold. Not just from the quantitative standpoint, because as we already said, it's fundamental to achieve highest material recovery rates, but also from the operational standpoint, because once we minimize food scraps in particular in residual waste, this makes it possible to sharply cut the frequency of collection rounds for residual waste, which leads to cost optimization of the scheme, in first instance, which is the most important to mayors and deputy mayors and local decision makers, managing directors of the waste management companies, and so on and so forth. But it also may exert a further driving effort for increased separation of the so-called dry recyclables, packaging waste. The lower the frequency at which I collect residual waste, the more prone will be households, the population, to separate plastics, glass, metals, paper, whatever, in order to put it at the curb and to have it collected more frequently. There are long-standing bio-waste strategies in many European countries. So we said the obligation stipulated at Article 22 is brand new, but separation of organics is not brand new at European level. There is a long-standing history in this respect. Some countries have adopted a mandate on separate collection. In the Netherlands since 1995, in Germany, this was made into an obligation since 2015. In Italy, it's still since 2021. Catalonia started in the mid-2000s. And many more are, of course, aligning because they are enforcing the provision which is included in Article 22 of the Waste Framework Directive. Other countries, they used to have targets, but now we do have common recycling targets at European level. And so it's becoming more and more evident, visible, that without an effective capture of bio-waste, there is no possibility to get to 65% at 2035 as stipulated by the Waste Framework Directive. Some countries, they used to have, and still they have some specific bio-waste targets. This is the case of Sweden. However, despite this long-standing history, already 10 and more years ago, there were some intriguing surveys which were showing that despite all the efforts, still a large part, most part of biowaste was still ending up in the so-called leakages from circular management. Some of that might be found in residual waste, some of that might be found in the sewerage system, because some of them, they used to have the incinerators, the sink grinders, and something like that. So this is why it is important to see whether the European strategies are producing a higher and higher capture of biowaste and food scraps in particular. So now to the calculation part and the findings. Of course, first of all, we had to adopt some unit generation rates, which is the theoretical potential for food scraps. In this respect, there is a very good study which was issued back in 2014, which was making a survey. This was done by Broitigan and other authors. And this was country-specific, so with different country-specific unit generation of food scraps. And basically, this aligns also with the latest EU-funded Fusion project, which gave us a unit generation rate of around 113 kilograms plus or minus 12 kilograms. And this is comprised of both households and the so-called large producers as the food services, the HoReCa sector, green groceries, bakeries, and so on and so forth. Then, since we wanted also to consider the general potential for biowaste and not just for food scraps, we also had to make some assumptions for garden waste. And for garden waste, we did assumptions related to the climate area and to the type of settlements, the type of housing. Of course, depending on the climate and on the type of housing, we have got different potential generations. Please be aware, we did not consider the 100% theoretical potential for garden waste, because whenever there is a garden, whenever there is garden waste, this means there is a garden in which we may promote home composting. So it doesn't make much sense to have excess delivery and collection of garden waste. We want to promote home composting as much as possible. So we considered a sensible theoretical potential for garden and park waste. So we came to the total theoretical potential for food waste and bio-waste, and we came up with such numbers in EU 27 plus, so European Union, besides United Kingdom and Norway, we came up with slightly more than 60 million tons of food waste potential generation, and more than 113 million tons of bio-waste generation. Of course, this is tons a year, of course. Then this was compared with the current captures in order to see how much is the untapped potential. So we used the Eurostat waste database whenever possible, but still this is not fully suitable for our specific survey, because first of all, there is no distinction whatsoever between food and garden waste. So in this respect, the assumptions we made and the cross-check we did with national statistics, whenever available, were of fundamental importance. Also, still sometimes Eurostat reports MBT compost-like outputs. Maybe the attendants, the participants to this webinar, they know what MBT is. It stands for mechanical biological treatments. In some countries, still the compost-like outputs, which are coming from MBT, are still accounted as recycled. This will not be possible anymore in a short time on account of what is stipulated in the Waste Framework Directive. So in the midterm, this will not have to be accounted anymore as recycling of bio-waste. So we supplemented the Eurostat databases with detailed investigation on national statistic official data, and with the assumptions we did also on garden waste and on the presence of food scraps in the bio-waste bins where there is commingled collection of food and garden waste. You will find all the details, of course, in the report, but I may give you some of the details if you so want during the Q&A. Now, let's come to the findings. these are the findings of the report back in 2020, so that we can take the pulse of the situation to see whether there was an improvement. Back in 2020, we came up with assessing a 32% capture rate for biowaste in general, and only as little as 16% capture rate for food waste. It's lower for food waste because, as I told you, this is the brand new stuff to be done. Separate collection of garden and park waste is comparatively easy to be implemented. And so basically what the municipalities do even before introducing curbside collection of food scraps, at least they tell people, okay, if you have got some garden waste, go to the civic amenity site at the municipal recycling center and take your garden waste there. And this is why the capture rate for biowaste used to be twice as much the capture rate for food waste. Now, let's compare with these the results, the findings in 2024. In 2024, the capture rates went up to 45% from 32% for biowaste and to 25% up from 16% for food waste. So we may be partly happy, but still, this means that 3/4 of food scraps are still left behind in residual waste. And so there are leakages from circular economy, from bioeconomy, from circular management of biowaste. Now, if we put it into a chart, this gives us a visual snapshot of what the situation looks like in EU 27. And as you can see, even in countries with long-standing obligations for separate management and separate collection of biowaste, there is a comparatively high capture of biowaste, which is the blue bars, but still a comparatively low capture of food scraps, which is the green bar. This is the case for Germany. This is the case, for instance, for the Netherlands, two countries with an obligation for separate collection since quite a few years. But we may have seeds of hope, because there are countries where the capture rate for food scraps tends to be remarkably higher. This is the case for Norway. This is the case for Italy. Coming to some general remarks. Bottom line, we compared the current captures not to the theoretical potential, because we do know that no separate collection system may be 100% effective. Still, there is something which doesn't get captured by separate collection, and this is true of biowaste as it is for paper, glass, metals, whatever. Of course, we do whatever we can day by day, also in my professional life, in order to help implementation of more and more effective collection schemes. But we want also to be pragmatic, and so we considered the operational potential. We do know that there is a widespread adoption of effective systems which may get up to 85% of the theoretical potential. And this is the case for most municipalities in Wales, many municipalities in Catalonia, a lot of municipalities in Italy. For instance, William Neale mentioned during his presentation the case of Sardinia. In Sardinia, basically all the municipalities are at such a level of capture of food scraps. But still, if we consider the current captures and we compare it not with the theoretical potential, 100% of the food scraps, but only the operational potential, which is 85% of the food scraps, still there may be 36 million tons a year or so of food scraps which might be captured in EU 27 plus, or slightly more than 30 million tons in EU 27 if we take United Kingdom and Norway off the calculation. And let's be mindful, this is potentially equivalent to some 10 to 15 million tons of compost, soil improvers, organic fertilizers, helping resilience of our soils against floods, against droughts, and so on and so forth. Storing carbon in our soils, helping us fight climate change, but also some 3 to 7 billion cubic meters of biogas, which may be equal to something between 2 and 4 billion cubic meters of biomethane. So this cannot be neglected, this cannot be overseen. But of course, what is needed for this to happen? Because we cannot do it just hoping for that to happen. Of course, we have to disseminate best practices. William Neale already mentioned some valuable reference documents in this respect. Let me draw your attention also to the BioBest Life program, which is funded by the European Union and which has already gone for a couple of years, and in which we are piling up evidence on best practices, on separate collection, on communication, on involvement, awareness raising, management of collected biowaste through composting, anaerobic digestion, and so on and so forth. So we have to disseminate best practices. And thanks God, we do have many references, be it in North Europe, be it in Southern Europe. I mentioned Catalonia, William Neale mentioned Sardinia. We do have them in the Central Eastern European countries, for instance, Slovakia, the national capital, Bratislava, Partizanske, which is a zero-waste city, already with an effective scheme for separate collection of biowaste. Slovenia is an outstanding example of a country which, with a dedicated commitment to separate collection of all the dry recyclables and, above all, of biowaste, went up to the highest spots in the rankings, worldwide rankings for recycling. So we have to keep confident, because sometimes it's the lack of confidence which prevents implementation. So the local decision makers, they say, well, my households are not prepared for that. But it may be done in all conditions. Some of them, I already mentioned them. Some of them I will mention in a while. And then we need regulatory drivers. The obligation is showing to be important, but not sufficient. And so probably it should be supplemented with legally binding targets. I will go back to this in a while. When it comes to the type of separate collection systems, we do know, first of all, that curbside systems or door-to-door collection is way more performing, much more performing than bring systems, road containers. This is a fundamental survey which was performed by the regional agency from Catalonia on waste management, and they compared the results in terms of captures and quality in door-to-door collection and collection with road containers. And as you can see, in door-to-door collection, there is almost 3 times as much capture of food scraps and biowaste than with road containers. But also, if I may, this is not the subject for today, but also the amount of impurities tends to be remarkably lower in door-to-door collection because there is individual responsibility. It's not an anonymous system. And why is it so important? Because the European targets are not in terms of separate collection targets, but in terms of net recycling. So the more impurities we do have in our biowaste, the more we will have to discard into rejects, and the less will be recycled and get into the calculation of preparation for use and recycling. But this is not for today. There will be time to discuss it another day. When it comes to the collection models for organics, we can see that some of the traditional collection models, above all in Central Europe, are based on commingled collection of garden and food waste. The rationale behind it is, yes, they go to the same treatment site, a composting site and an anaerobic digestion site, so why not collecting them together? In other parts of Europe, there is a dedicated collection scheme for bespoke kitchen waste. And if we take a look at the consequences of the 2 different operational approaches, this is a great chart from a city in Germany, Freiburg, namely Freiburg, which is doing comparatively well with separate collection. It is a comparatively large city, totaling hundreds, thousands of people living there. But if you take a look at the composition of the biowaste bin, you will see that in the urban area, in the city center, almost 50% of the collected biowaste is garden waste, actually. And in the outskirts, it's more than 2/3 of biowaste, which is garden waste. So this is not negative in itself, but you have to consider the seasonal fluctuations in garden waste collection. So in wintertime, there will be almost no garden waste to be collected. So some have to stop there and collect a whole wheelie bin with just a few kilograms of food waste, because they provided extra room for the extra collection of garden waste during the summer months. So seasonal fluctuations may be a problem. And so may be a problem the bulky nature of garden waste. With garden waste, I need packer trucks, which are very, very expensive, whereas those municipalities who have a dedicated collection of food scraps only, they use very small, simple, and cheap open lorries, so they may increase the collection frequency. So there are some benefits which are connected to schemes which are targeting kitchen waste only, with a separate collection round for garden waste, with a dedicated collection round, or telling people go to the municipal recycling center to take your garden waste there. Less volume, no seasonal peaks, cheaper fleet, possibility to increase the frequency of collection rounds. Therefore, the system looks more user-friendly, and people are more prone to participating and maximizing the captures of food scraps. So now, about confidence, and I'm going to put some icing on the cake towards the end of my presentation. Of course, one question that always pops up and crosses minds of the local decision makers. Okay, this is easy to be done in the small villages, but what about the big cities we do have in Europe? Well, there are many big cities there showing examples, showing evidence. This may be done with high efficiency. For instance, Milan, 1.5 million people besides 800,000 daily commuters who are producing food scraps at least once a day for lunch in the city. Milan is currently capturing 87.5% of the total organics generated by the city. And so it's showing the way to all the other cities. There is Ljubljana, the national capital of Slovenia, Copenhagen, Bristol, the third largest city in England, Barcelona, which is covering progressively all the neighborhoods in the city. And in some such cities, including Milan, there is around 10% organics in residual waste, sometimes even less, thanks to high captures of food scraps. So once in residual waste I have got such a low percentage of organics, I can sharply reduce the collection frequency for residual waste with all the beneficial consequences we have already investigated. Third and final, last but not least, we need the regulatory drivers. This is basically informing about a position paper, an open letter, which was submitted to the European Commission a couple of years ago by a network of stakeholders, including cities, local jurisdictional subdivisions, regions, and something like that, researchers, academics, industrial networks such as the European Compost Network, and so on and so forth. And we said, hey, look, the obligation is great, but it's not sufficient on itself to drive well-performing separate collection systems, because there is an easy way to comply with the obligation. Some municipalities just put out a few bins in the main square, and they tell people, okay, please separate your organics. Okay, they comply with the obligation, but this is not result-oriented. So the open letter said, we recommend adopting a binding reduction target on the amount of bio-waste included in mixed or residual waste. Why should it be pitched this way? Because a legally binding target should not get in the way of, for instance, of food recovery programs. So with a legally binding target only on separate collection of bio-waste, some local decision makers would put no emphasis on food recovery programs, because they would say they would take some bio-waste out of the legally binding target for separate collection of bio-waste. But food recovery programs, home composting programs, community composting programs, and separate collection, they all merge towards what we really need, which is minimization of organics in residual waste. So this is something to be considered. So time to wrap up, time for questions and answers, time for the key takeaways. Food waste is still a largely untapped potential. There are drivers, powerful drivers, including the Article 22 of Waste from Directive, which are boosting interest and activities in this respect. And schemes are already diffused, so we do have already references for implementation, also in densely populated areas, also in Southern Europe, also in Central Eastern European countries. So whatever your specific situation, you may be confident it may be done. Collection of bio-waste as a whole is already widespread, but it's mainly propelled so far by garden waste. Food waste, it's the next big thing, the brand new stuff to be considered. And this potential is still to be largely harnessed, because from food waste, we can take out valuable organic compounds through biorefineries, as they will tell us in one of next presentations. We can take out, of course, soil improvers, but we can take out bioenergy, biogas, biomethane, and so on and so forth. There's still room for improvement, also in those areas, in those countries, in those regions with a long-standing operational history in separate collection of bio-waste. User-friendliness of the system has to be considered when designing the system, and the opportunities are coming mainly from the design of the collection rounds and the tools. For instance, Neale mentioned the potential role of compostable bags. They may be paper bags or compostable plastics, whatever, but they are a fundamental tool in order to maximize the captures. So it is time maybe to update and supplement the regulatory drivers. And this might be done right now because there is the ongoing revision of the Waste Framework Directive. So this is something to be considered. And since it is one of the most important messages I wanted to share with you, I put it last in my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Enzo. That was enlightening. So we heard about the crystal ball from William. We heard from you about the facts. Sorry, about the facts and the figures. Also, room for improvement with 75% not being collected. That's a nice underestimation. There's big room for improvement, I would say. But let's also hear from the others. I understand were some issues with using the Q&A function. I think that problem is solved now, so you should be able to use the Q&A function. In the meantime, please also use the raise your hand, and we will be able to call you up, and then please switch on the microphone, state who you are and the question you have, so we will be able to do that. Colleagues, can you confirm that the Q&A function is working again? If not, we switch to the traditional speak up in real life, in real person.
You can also use the chat function.
Yeah. Is it working for everybody? Then please use it. If not, I'll look through my
I saw William with his hand raised earlier.
Oh, was it a hand raised or a clap? William, you clapped or you raised your hand?
I was actually applauding Enzo for his presentation. But if we want to fill a bit of time whilst we try and get the technical stuff sorted out, I was wondering about food waste reduction, whether there's any analysis of that, because obviously reduction of waste is at the top of the waste hierarchy. I was wondering if there's any analysis or any findings from your work on that and how we can effectively do it, or is that just something which is completely different and needs to be addressed separately?
Thanks, William. This is a question of outstanding importance. No, actually, we didn't dig deeper into the food waste reduction potential. There are very good reports out there also from international institutions and agencies. However, right, because we do know the discussion is still ongoing in the frame of the revision, the midterm revision of the Waste Framework Directive. This is also why we opt for and propose an overall target which discusses minimization of organics and residual waste instead of just focusing on the potential of separate collection. Because if we say you have to collect at least 100 kilograms per inhabitant in year bio-waste, this would somehow get in the way of the commitment on food waste recovery programs and food waste reduction. But that's a very great question. And I think it will be very, very high on the bio-waste agenda in next couple of years, right after the midterm revision of the Waste Framework Directive.
Okay. Thank you, Enzo. I see that Mike Steenewage has raised his hand. Mike, please say who you are and share your screen. Let us know what is your question,
You can
please.
turn on his microphone and his
Yeah,
video.
it's done. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Enzo, for the wonderful presentation, and to everyone involved in organizing this this wonderful presentation of the paper. Yeah, first of all, Enzo, thank you so much for mentioning the Life BioBus project. Yeah, we are working together as part of Fundació END, based in Catalonia. We work with Enzo and Zero Waste Europe on the guiding and mainstreaming the best practices in Europe for bio-waste management. But I wanted to ask a question about the data, because the data is in some ways a little bit surprising, and kind of it almost seems optimistic that so much as the EU average, so much bio-waste and food waste is being collected. So I wanted to ask about the margin of error and the accuracy, and if you would understand these estimates to be an overestimate or an underestimate, and how do you based on your work, how have you kind of encountered this data? Are you surprised by it too?
Thanks, Mike. Well, of course, this might be discussed for weeks, and we do not have all the time. But no, definitely, as I said, we had to make assumptions, cross-checking the existing studies when it comes to generation and the national statistics regarding generation. And when it comes to captures, the Eurostat database and the national statistics reduced the margin of errors. However, I think in the end of the story, what's most important is to see the magnitude and the trend. The trend is upward, for sure, because there was an increase in the collection of bio-waste as a whole and food scraps in particular. But still, once we compare with the potential magnitude of bio-waste and food scraps at European level, we see there is still a long way to go. So this is the key message. Also, there was another point which was crossing my mind, but too many points crossing my mind, and so I have forgotten. I'm sorry for that, Mike, but quite probably I do know you. I have got your mobile phone number, and so as soon as I pick it back in my mind, I will call you. Yeah, sorry.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Enzo. Enzo, I don't know if you can see also the questions in the Q&A section, but if not, I read it out to you. We have a question from Piotr from the ASIN Foundation. Thanks, Enzo. Can you elaborate on how the cap on organics shall be counted? X percentage in mixed waste or X kilogram per capita in mixed waste?
Oh, it's definitely the latter, because the first one might be influenced by high productions or low productions of residual waste. So this might be penalizing those municipalities, which are very good also at separating dry packaging materials, dry recyclables, and this would concentrate bio-waste and residual waste. So if we use a percentage, the percentage is always a little bit devious, misleading. So in the end of the story, we do know more or less how much food scraps are there in European waste. And we can set a target in terms of kilograms per inhabitant in year, a certain target, for instance, 25 kilograms at 2035, 15 kilograms at 2040. This is not, coming out of the blue, picked from the air. This is already met in many, many municipalities, including comparatively large ones. And if I may, I remember now what I wanted to tell Mike. in particular, the assumptions that most might influence the result were the assumptions regarding garden and park waste. Because as I told you, in the end of the story, it's quite easy to make a calculation. We do know how much a square meter of garden produces in terms of grass clippings, dry leaves, shrubs, and so on and so forth. But as I told you, we only considered a sensible capture of garden waste because we do not want to create waste. We want to collect the waste that households do not want to compost at home. And so in this respect, we adopted a particular sensible, sharp assumption, which might be divergent from the total production of garden and park waste. But this is written in the report.
Okay, thank you, Enzo. There are three more questions. Maybe we can shortly address them. I would take the question from Peter and Mihaela together, maybe. So the question from Peter is, what is the value of biowaste per kilogram? So biowaste as kitchen and or garden waste. What is the value per kilogram? And the second question in that context, you mentioned that biowaste goes mainly to compost and anaerobic digestions. Are there pilots for other types of processing?
Yeah, very quickly, actually, there is a cost for delivering biowaste to the processing sites. When it comes to composting and anaerobic digestion sites, of course, this might be wide-ranging depending on the total cost, local cost structure, and whether or not there are fundings. So we have to spell the truth, of course. It incurs a cost, but the cost now in Europe tends to be remarkably lower than the cost of landfilling or incineration, above all on account of the so-called DNSH principle. DNSH stands for Do Not Significantly Harm Circular Economy and the Climate Policy, which is preventing any funding, any granting measure from going to incineration and landfilling. So while landfilling and incineration are costing more and more and more, all the funds for circular economy will go to recycling and composting and separate collection. And this is making composting and anaerobic digestion more and more cost competitive. Yes, there are other activities other than composting and anaerobic digestion. I mentioned them briefly during my presentation. Biorefineries are an intriguing area. There will be a presentation right after mine on the biorefineries, one of the case histories from the big members. But biorefineries, they complement very well with composting and anaerobic digestion because biorefineries, basically, they extract the highest value compounds. Still a large part of the biomass is there, and it may go for composting and anaerobic digestion afterwards. So there may be a cascading approach with biorefineries, then anaerobic digestion to recover bioenergy, and then composting to make digestate into a fertilizer, or using digestate, as in many countries, directly on farmlands.
Well, I think that was a good transition, and so maybe to the next slides. I see other question coming up. Please raise them. We will make sure we'll get back to you. But in light of time, I would suggest that we move on. So thanks, Enzo. Please stay with us. I'm sure maybe we come back to you with some of the other questions. But we heard the crystal ball. We heard some theory on data and from the report, and now we'll go to even more practical insights from a Zero Waste Europe member and from a big member, starting with Ismael Casotti, who is the Zero Waste Cities Coordinator at Zero. So Ismael, please, the floor is yours. Share with us some practical insights from your view.
Okay, I'll go and share my screen. Let's see if it works properly. Okay, now you should be able to see my screen. Hello, everyone. As was said, I'm based in Portugal. I work for the Portuguese NGO called Zero. So we're going to speak a bit about how's the biowaste topic being addressed in our country. Okay, so I'm going to dividing the conversation just into parts. One is the legal framework and the geographical reach of the legal framework and how it's being implemented in the country. with some also differentiation between the separate collection and then decentralized composting, so community composting and home composting as a complement to the system. And then we're going to have a quick look at 4 cases for best practices in Portugal. Then we're going to wrap it up. So we could argue that legal framework is easy because the European Union says what we have to do. That's for all of us to comply from this year, and that's not what happens actually in everyday life in Portugal. So let's look at the map of Portugal. You can see here on the left, these are about 300 municipalities. What you see here is not only the municipalities, but also a smaller part of municipalities in 2 colors. This is because before the obligation, the national agency decided to have a study to assess the potential of the implementation, the technical viability of the implementation of bio-waste collection, because they thought, okay, we are obliged to separately collect bio-waste, but not every city is as suitable as others to separate bio-waste. Some of them because they are more dense, so it's easier to create a circuit specifically for bio-waste. And as you can see, most of the red ones, they are quite rural, so we should raise the question whether it's efficient or not to collect bio-waste separately, or if it's better to go for example, composting as a more important method. So anyway, from 2019, when this study was done, until 2024, so 5 years, let's say, there's a big problem of lack of funding, but also it's uneven implementation because some cities, some front runners started, and most of the other municipalities are just waiting and looking to see how the neighbors are doing and for them to start. What's the situation of the implementation in Portugal? We have a study from Erstat that said that 79% entities, let's say about 20% of all of them, started with separate collection of bio-waste. It doesn't mean on the whole municipalities. What I'm saying, they started it, and this collection covered only half of the users of those 79 entities. And if we translate that into the national panorama, it's about 15% of households in Portugal have somewhere close a bio-waste bin or door-to-door collection. And if we ask the municipalities which are the main difficulties, what they replied in this study was scarce, so not sufficient human resources from their side, insufficient funding, and also insufficient know-how from a technical point of view. But we said that community composting and home composting can be complementary to waste collection. So the national entity, the national environmental agency of Portugal, is called APA. That's why you see the name here down in the table. They decided that TO, as we call it, tratamento in origin, which is decentralized treatment, must be an important complement, but not for every municipality. If you look at the numbers in the third table, you will see even if you don't understand the language, it's just for you to see that some regions, the region of Val Nord, Valor Sul, Valor Minho, they have really different targets, meaning that not all of them should invest in composting as such. And why is that? They take into account the densely populated areas, the distance from composting plan, and all these topics. But then municipalities and regional waste management entities are worried because they say, okay, we need now to go for a broad community composting and home composting programs, but who's going to put the funds for it, and who's going to be checking, who's going to be the composting master, who's going to be checking if the composting is happening properly. And if we do not comply with those targets, the numbers you see here on the table, who's going to run after us and put in penalties? So this is something that's worrying pretty much all of us. But let's look at good practices, because I'm glad to say that we have good practices all around the country, and we're going to start from Maya. Why we start from Maya? Because it was the first municipality in the country in 2005 to start with bio-waste collection, so more than 10 years ago, and in my opinion, is going to be the first municipality to comply with European targets in 2030. So the domestic users started, the collection for domestic users started only in 2018, but they started from services and Horeca sector, which is the one that gives the better results always. And they are every year and a half or two, they're extending their reach into new neighborhoods. This is a table that explains, a picture that explains how they started. They started with the houses. We call it edificios unifamiliares. Is the easiest way to go. Of course, they have more space to put the bins, but also, and very important, they have now 45,000 inhabitants covered by the door-to-door collection. This is not curbside. This is very important in a specific compartment. I beg your pardon, because they established a rule in the municipality that obliges new buildings to create a separate waste room that's accessible to the collection service. So this way they are able to cover about 60 something thousand inhabitants in the municipality with different waste bins, with different trucks, with different circuits. Anyway, they are able currently to collect around 300 tons per month, meaning that per year they have around 3,600 tons of kitchen waste, plus, oh, sorry, I went too fast, plus another similar number of garden bio-waste. And we have to be very careful about the bio-waste word, because in Portugal we are transitioning from bio-waste as kitchen waste to bio-waste as a mix of kitchen waste and garden waste. So we really have to be careful about our numbers. So what happens in Maya is that I showed you before 3,600 tons per year, and now we have a very different number here, recyclables. The recyclables is bio-waste plus dry recyclables. It means that when we implement bio-waste collection in a municipality, we also, and it's door to door, and there's a pay-as-you-throw scheme, as in the case of Maya, but we're able to increase the capture rate of all of them. I see some noise in the background. So the importance of bio-waste collection and pay-as-you-throw here is to show that pay-as-you-throw is necessary at some point to get a better collection rates, and also financial capacity of the municipality to keep on with the investments. Let's have a look at Guimarães. That could be the second example in Portugal, introducing also pay-as-you-throw at a very small level. But just a few data. I want to show you here these maps because the map is important, is the municipality of Guimarães. But then you have these freguesias, these parishes, and they only started in the first phase with a historical area, which is the green tiny dot you have here in the middle. Why? Because they have a lot of tourism. It's a UNESCO city, so they have a lot of touristic activities in the center, and you must keep the city clean. Keeping the city clean means having a very proficient collection, a very frequent one. And once they started with bio-waste, they really had to do it in a way that 2-3 times a day to keep all the waste collected at the reasonable and adapted time because of the hotels and restaurants. Once they established this system and it works, they went for the second phase, which is the second part of the map, in which you have both the gray and the beige and the green areas, meaning that the areas where most of the population lives, and then you have door to door, but you also have the curbside bins. So you have a much bigger amount of inhabitants, which is around 55,000 inhabitants. And the numbers are showing that for the third phase, they're gonna get only the rural areas with some composting and some herbicide, which is not going to help much. The numbers they got, the best figures they got in the second phase because they have a lot of population and commercial activities and Horeca sector contributing. The numbers show that if you make an effort in adjusting the calendar, and it's not only about the Horeca, but it's adjusting the calendar to the characteristics of your city, you will be able to convince the people to deliver bio-waste, but also to sort out the recyclables and everything that's needed. But let's go check the data very quickly. They had a very nice progression from 6 to 36 kilograms per inhabitant, which is pretty much lower than than the numbers Enzo showed in Milan or in other European cities. But if we look at the 50,000 inhabitants of the served area, we have around 120 kilos per inhabitant and per year, which is similar to the data of Milan and of those best practices. And they have a very nice door-to-door collection circuit with the most suitable small electric truck that goes into the historical part of the city. They have pay-as-you-throw with a penalty and bonification scheme for bio-waste, plus the decentralized composting in remote areas to reduce the costs of their collection. Now let's have a look at the third case of São João da Madeira. I'll keep it quick.
Ismael, just to quickly interrupt you, as you have a couple of slides and we have one more speaker, so yeah,
Yep.
please.
Yeah. So just to show here the case of São João da Madeira, where the mapping is really important to understand where the door-to-door can be performed in, as you see in habitações, so in detached houses, and how do you make the transition of door-to-door also to the buildings. This is really important because the way you collect in buildings is going to be different. The numbers are also similar to the ones that were shown before by my colleague Enzo, with very low contamination rate, below 5%. But also the big challenge here goes into going to bigger buildings. How do we go? How we find the necessary funds to buy the technology and the bins and the trucks necessary for collecting in a different way. Just very quickly going into the rural areas. The rural areas may have a different approach with a very low technology input because they don't need to and they don't have the funds to. So as we have the case here of Forest Algodres, they started with door-to-door and composting, trying to understand how much they produce and whether is it worth collecting or not. Maybe it's not worth collecting in all municipalities or all corners of the municipalities because they could use just composting, and they keep it low tech, low cost. And this is something that we could take as an example for some more remote municipalities. Jumping to the conclusions and wrap it up. The obligations we have are not enough because it's easy to go around it. We need strong guidance and good practices to show to similar municipalities and for them to increase their capacitation, training, and know-how. But on the other side, we need clear drivers with performance indicators. We need to understand which are the KPIs, the performance indicators that we look at and make them comparable. And also when we establish a funding procedure, we should make an outcome-based funding scheme in the sense that if we found a project that is not performing, it will not help reaching our goals. This is something very complicated topic, actually. I don't want to take more time from the next speakers, so I will stop here and give you back the screen control for the next speaker to go.
Ismael, obrigada also to you. Thanks for these
No
insights,
worries.
also particularly the conclusion. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Amir Oranim. He is the CEO and co-founder of TripleW. Amir, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. I see the screen. I don't see my deck.
Can we move forward? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. I will present TripleW. TripleW is an Israeli startup company which converts food waste into lactic acid and also PLA, which is biodegradable bioplastics, utilizing a climate transformative technology. Next. So we solve several problems. So for the food waste management problems, it was clearly presented already by the speakers, by the previous speakers. I won't talk a lot about digestion, incineration, or landfill, but I will just say that these are either not environmental solution or not economical solutions that could, stand alone. Treat food waste without the need of subsidies. So this is the first solution this is the first problem that we solve. The second problem that we solve is the lactic acid production. Currently, lactic acid and PLA are produced from food crops. These food crops like sugarcane and corn are very expensive, and they drive the price of the product to be much more expensive than traditional plastics. Also, because sugar is expensive, usually the manufacturers are located in places where the sugar is very cheap, like Thailand. And then you need not only to produce from the sugar, but also freight it to Europe. So additional cost, additional environmental impact, negative environmental impact. So we come to solve all of these problems by maximizing the value of food waste and producing the second or even third generation of lactic acid and PLA. Next. So this is how the process looks like in high level. We take the food waste, we ferment it till we have this brown broth of food waste with the lactic acid. We clean the lactic acid from all the residues in the food waste until we have the clean, pure lactic acid, which we call and trademarked as Circulac. We use off-the-shelf technologies or even working with partners on the PLA production. We don't have the technology for the PLA production from the lactic acid. It's a different story. But where our technology comes back to the game is when we can recycle the PLA back to the process. So keeping the carbon in the loop, keeping the materials in the loop. We saw that from customers, we saw that it was very, very important for them, the end-of-life solution. So we also introduced this into the system. Next. This is how it looks like. So on the left, you see the brown, messy, smelly food waste. Then we ferment it into this brown soup, clean it to the transparent lactic acid, and then we can use it in, for example, cleaning applications, cleaning materials applications produced by Ecover. By the way, this is a CB. This was under the CBJU project called Waste to Funk. Ecover and us were some of the partners, and you can see how this type of product can make a difference. This is the first time where lactic acid from food waste entered the market to be sold to the end user. Next. We have a demo site. We used to have a demo site in Belgium, in Port of Antwerp, in an anaerobic digestion facility called Darling Ingredients, formerly Group of the Beak. Now we moved the demo site to the Next Gen District in Port of Antwerp. The Next Gen District is a place where it welcomes circular economy companies like TripleW, and we will showcase our technology also over there. And this is really correlates with the business model. We can either be located in, for example, AD, anaerobic digestion facilities, and add additional revenues by producing the lactic acid, or be located independently and produce only the lactic acid without the need of the anaerobic digestion. Next. So if you compare us to the legacy producers that use food crops, our process is more environmental from a GHG point of view. We don't need any land use. We don't need to grow any crops. Our byproduct is only the compost, which is then being treated by anaerobic digestion, for example, but we don't produce any gypsum like all the other lactic acid manufacturers. For lactic acid salts, which is the lactic acid derivatives, usually producers need to perform additional steps. For TripleW technology, it's built in the system, so we can produce it in the same place, in the same location. We don't need huge facilities. We can already be very profitable in relatively small facilities. We are not relying on sugarcane, and we are not impacted by the price of sugar. We can use versatile types of food waste coming from logistics centers, coming from supermarkets, also from dairy companies, from bakery companies. And this makes us independent of specific location. We don't need to be, located where the sugar is cheap. We can be located wherever there's enough food waste, which is everywhere. Next. So as I mentioned, we performed an LCA with the Nova Institute. We chose that the process has a carbon negative footprint. We don't use any land. We also have developed the recycling of the PLA itself, which can also add to the climate impact that we have as in the process. And also, if you take into account the EU deforestation legislation, then you can see that the process itself has many angles of impact on the environment. Next. All right, now Circle. Circle is a flagship project which was awarded the grant earlier this year, kicked off September this year. This is a very exciting project under which TripleW will build its first flagship, first-of-a-kind production unit at the site of Orgaworld, which is subsidiary of Renewi, the biggest waste collector in the Netherlands. So as you see, like the previous demo site that we had, we will now be co-locating within the site of Renewi. The idea is that we will treat the food waste, everything that was not converted into lactic acid goes back for anaerobic digestion in Renewi's site. So fully circular, everything is being treated. We get the food waste from different sources. So of course from Renewi, the main supplier of the food waste, but also from Van der Mutele, one of the biggest bakery companies in Belgium, Friesland Campina, one of the biggest dairy companies in the world, located in the Netherlands, and also Favoino, which is another member in the BIC, also one flagship project, and they will provide us with their food waste, not the food waste, sorry, wood waste coming from wood degradation that they are performing. TripleW then produces the lactic acid, which can go then to different application. First, lactate salt, which can be used by Davines, an Italian personal care company. Lactic acid to be used with Ecover in additional cleaning materials applications, and also PLA. So the PLA, the bioplastic itself, will be produced by LG Chem and Sulzer, and then will be used as an application for food packaging by Tipa, for cosmetic packaging by Sulapak, and very interestingly, for car application by Volkswagen. So you can see here that we have the full value chains, the biggest companies in their industries, from food waste, different types of food waste, until the end application, lactic acid, lactate salt, and PLA to be used in car application. I think this is a very exciting project, and we are very excited to already begin working on it. Next slide. In addition to the Circle project, we also develop an independent project that will use mostly monostreams, and it will be located adjacent to our demo site, also in the Port of Antwerp, also in the Next Gen district. And it will use monostreams such as dairy streams and bakery streams, but not mixed with food waste, but only as a monostream production. Yeah, next. Yeah, so yeah, this is TripleW.
Okay. Amir, that was it from your side?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm aware of time, but maybe my colleague Jack from Zero Waste Europe, are you there? Are you able to do a quick conclusions, Jack?
Very quick. I just wanted to say thank you to the BIC team for organizing this webinar and for all the speakers. It's been an amazing overview of the work. I think the highlight stat is that 75% of food waste currently generated in the EU is not being captured ending up in landfills, generating methane, and sort of really missing a potential for improving our soils and for many other projects that have been highlighted through the two presentations by Amir and Ismael. So thank you all for joining. We will be sharing the reports afterwards, so please feel free to obviously to go into more detail to read this. A big thank you also to William Neale from the Commission to highlight this as a priority, given the political uncertainties coming up in the next few weeks and months, but hopefully we'll have clarity towards the end of the year and into January. So hopefully we can continue the partnership to improve the status. So by the time we do a next report, the third version, the figures will hopefully have improved a lot. Thanks so much, Marco. Back to you.
All right. Well, I think nothing more to be added. Thanks also from the big side for all the speakers taking your time. Have a look at the report. We take good care of the questions you have when we could not answer it and get back to you. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the day and talk soon. Bye-bye, everybody.